It's my pleasure to introduce Chris Henry, who is the Director of Platform Technology for Epic Sciences. He is, like many of you, has a background in computer science, so he spent 15 years developing solutions, but he also brings together R&D, clinical, and partners into a connected ecosystem. So with that, I give you Chris Henry.
Thank you. Good morning. First of all, thanks for the opportunity to the Thermo and Core Informatics people. It's fun to brag about the things that your team has done and share it with the rest of the world. So you can read the one about me. I'm not going to talk about me. We're going to talk about, give you a little bit of an introduction to who Epic Sciences is. You guys have probably never heard of Epic Sciences, so we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk a little bit about the test that we brought to market this year, why it's important. We'll talk about how you take a lab that's never done clinical work before and turn them into a clinical lab, because that's a thing. And then we'll talk about how we use technology to make all of that happen. So we start with the premise that around the world, somebody dies of cancer every 4 seconds. Across every socioeconomic line, first world, third world, doesn't matter. Someone's dying from cancer every day somewhere around the world. We don't find this a particularly acceptable state of being, so we've decided to work on that. We spend a ton of money on cancer medicine in this world. So $133 billion in 2017. They're expecting the cost of therapy to continue to go up, sometimes doubling. I got into the cancer business entirely by accident in around 2004, early 2005. Within a week of each other, my father was diagnosed with prostate cancer. My sister-in-law was diagnosed with breast cancer. The best information they could give those two patients, who I care deeply about, was that we're pretty sure this medicine will work. We're pretty sure removing part of the prostate will help. That's it, right? My sister-in-law passed away 4 years later during Obama's first inauguration speech, ironically enough. My father's still alive. The process of arriving at what medicine a patient should receive it's an art, and it's a very, very difficult thing for an oncologist to have to work through. And it's based on their experience. It's based on practicing with tens of thousands of patients if you're lucky. But it's super imprecise. Epic has started, so we're a company that's 10 years old. We just celebrated this past weekend our 10-year anniversary as a company. And it all comes from some research that came out of the Scripps Research Institute around finding cancer cells on a glass slide. So we take a tube of blood, and from that tube of blood, we plate that blood onto slides, take a look at it, and when we find those cancer cells, we can do amazing things. We can look at those cells and characterize that cancer at the cellular level. Individual cancer cells. We can tell if those cancer cells are expressing particular antibodies. We've even developed technology to literally scoop individual cancer cells off of a slide and do a whole genome sequence just of that cancer cell, right? Now, I'm not a scientist. I don't even play one on TV. But I hang out with a lot of crazy smart people. And that's really cool, right? DNA sequencing a single cancer cell. And the opportunity to learn from that is pretty amazing. Being able to understand the cell allows us to, and we'll talk about the tests in a minute, but understanding that cell allows us to understand that cancer in a fundamental way and give oncologists and urologists, in the case of our first test, really valuable information about how they can actually treat their patient. And we believe that that certainty of treatment is more valuable and more effective than billion-dollar cancer drugs, right? Because if that drug is applied to the wrong patient, it's not going to work. And if you're relying on your oncologist's gut feel for what drug to give a particular patient, you're hoping for the best. So we brought to market last year a test called ARV7 Nucleus Detect. We did it in partnership with Genomic Health. It's the first predictive test for metastatic castration-resistant prostate cancer. Okay, I had to practice that a few times to get that string right. Late-stage cancer patients are really, really looking for information. And this test allows us, if we are able to find a single cell in around 6 to 8 billion cells that we plate, a single cell that expresses the ARV7 antibody in the nucleus of that cancer cell, we know, and we have studies that show, that that patient will not respond to AR signal inhibitor therapy, which is the standard of care for a lot of prostate cancer. We know, and we also know that they will respond to a traditional chemo like taxane. Interestingly, traditional chemo is a lot less expensive than AR signal inhibitors and extends the patient's life. So we have a test that's relatively inexpensive, that gives an oncologist or urologist certainty, that extends the patient's life at a lower cost. Everybody wins, right? And as of last week, we've received final LCD coverage for the test, so now it's going to be available to patients around the country. So this is huge. We are ecstatic about this. So that's the test. That's Epic. Part of the challenge, though, is we're also a company that's been focused on developing this technology for the last 10 years. We've been building up and working with a bunch of pharma partners around the country to find applications for this technology. And that meant that we had to invent the CLIA lab out of whole cloth, or out of thin air, rather. And the first part of that, and I mentioned it briefly on the prior slide, is that we partnered with another company to perform this test, or to offer this test. So we're a small company. We have around 100 employees across the country. We are not positioned, and nor do we want to be positioned, to field a sales force that's probably the same size as our company to get this test out there to all the urologists and oncologists that need to have access to the test. Nor do we want to get into the medical billing business. Anybody here ever done medical billing before? It's a treat, isn't it? You need another company the size of Epic just to do that. So Genomic Health has been a great partner for us in offering this test, and we've actually been offering it for a little over a year in limited release. They handle all of the sales activities. They handle all of the billing activities. We do the stuff we're good at. We do the tests, right? We create that patient report. Now, from a systems perspective, that creates some interesting integration challenges that we'll get into in a minute. Another interesting, fun part about this test is that we need the sample to be stable. So we had to invent something else along the way, which is a way to transmit a tube of blood from a draw site somewhere in the US back to our lab, and do it in a way that allows that sample to remain at room temperature for the entire duration of the trip. So we needed a container that was robust, a way to contain the sample. There's actually a struct tube inside of here. So that we could receive the sample in good condition. We actually received one of these kits about a month or two ago. I don't know what FedEx does to packages, but they had crushed the canister that we ship in, literally crushed it. The thing was, it was about an inch or two thinner along one axis. And we opened up this top cap and got into the where the sample's at. Sample was just fine. It was perfectly intact. It took a pipe wrench to get the lid off, and we never were able to reuse that canister again. But we had to invent a way to get that blood sample to us because the sample has to ship at room temperature, can't be frozen, can't be overheated. Right? This time of year, it gets a little chilly in a few places that aren't San Diego. Boston, for example. And so we needed to maintain temperature stability. We needed to not break that tube. We needed the blood to arrive intact. Because even though it's just a blood draw, and taking blood from a cancer patient is relatively non-invasive compared to carving them open and cutting out a piece of them, which is what traditional pathology does, you're still invading them a little bit to get there, and we just don't ever want to do that again unless we have to. The last part of this that represents some challenges is a new way to analyze these cells. We've been working on a platform at Epic since the very beginning. Meg Hanadi, who's one of my colleagues who's presenting tomorrow, has been around for most of that. As part of this effort, we also introduced a whole new way to analyze the slides, higher resolution slide imagers, cloud-based algorithms. So we had to get all that figured out too. So those were the challenges. Now let's talk about the lab process and what the lab goes through. When I first got into the lab business, entirely by accident in 2004, I'd never worked in any medical facility at all. I had worked as an internet consultant because, that's fun. And so I had to understand the lab, and so I'd meet with the different people in the lab, and they'd start telling me what they did. So I started making Visio diagrams, and I'd go back to them a couple days later. So this is what you told me that you guys do. And they said, yeah, but over here, this is a little different. And so for about 2 months, I kept going back and forth. Every time I think I'd have it right, they'd say, yeah, except, right? So anybody ever tried to map out a lab process before? It's completely solid from the very beginning, right? It never changes. Wrong. So we have to understand the process first so that we can understand how we can automate against that. So for us, the process starts with sales. There's a bunch of stuff that genomic health does around sales into oncology and pathology or urology suites. I'll focus on a little bit of it. Account setup, kit order, kit shipped. Those kits that we just look at, those have to be manufactured. They have to be placed on site so they're ready for patients when the physician decides to order the test. We have some work that we do with GHI to make sure all that happens. Ordering the test is something, of course, that the ordering physician does. We need to get that blood drawn. We need to get it into the kit. We need to ship it, track it, and deliver it. One of the fun things about building a system for a brand new lab is you get to start with a blank canvas. A lot of labs that I've worked at knew what they were getting because they would get a report from FedEx or UPS the night before that had the number of boxes that were expected to show up. Yay. But they never really had a good idea of how many samples we got to, because each one of those kits is uniquely numbered and uniquely tracking, set up with FedEx, we know exactly where every kit is and when it's been shipped. And we're able to do that with that part of the process. So like most labs, we receive the accessions, receive the samples, we accession them into our systems. We go through a sample prep process because we can't just take the blood right out of the tube, drop it on a glass slide and move on. So there's some sample prep process. We put those cells onto some very special slides that have a hydrophobic border around the edge. That allows us to keep all of the white blood cells and the cancer cells that we receive. We're not filtering any out, right? One of the catchphrases for the company early on was no cell left behind. We keep all of the cells that we find. We stain the slides with an immunofluorescent stain. We scan it on a high-resolution immunofluorescent scanner, and then we analyze it through that analytical process we were talking about earlier. Like many reporting processes, we have CLSs that go through things and make sure everything is super straightforward before the pathologist shows up. Pathologist takes a look at it, creates an interpretation of those results, signs it, and then we distribute the report. And then Genomic Health picks up the ball again and goes and tries to find some money for this test. With that LCD coverage that was just announced, we're looking forward to getting actually reimbursed for these tests. All right, so you know, when creating this slide, I was reminded of the Spider-Man quote, "With great power comes great responsibility." Well, with partnerships come great complexity, right? So we have Genomic Health doing account setup, kit orders, report distribution. They own the relationship with the physician. They own the relationship with the patient. That's not us. Have you ever worked in a lab where you have pathologists signing reports who couldn't get a phone call from an ordering physician directly? Well, that's us. That was a problem we had to solve for. The test order happens through GHI's portal. It's great that they have a portal because we didn't have to build it, but that means we have to interface with that. And then, of course, we do a lot of the actual test performing activities. So then we get down to what solutions, what technologies can we use to solve for all of this, right? Because it's not just one thing that we're trying to solve for here. So the three choices that we all perennially have are we can build it. So as a person who has a degree in software engineering, this has always been my first go-to, right? Epic Science is a small company. I have exactly 3 software engineers, okay? Building the system from scratch with 3 engineers would take more time than we have to get things done. So build it, probably not a good choice. Also, is building lab software a business that I really want to be in? Not really. We could buy it. So I could go out to any one of the vendors out there who sell comprehensive solutions and sell my soul to them and come away very sad and very poor at the other side of that, right? We've all been down this path. You know, the thing that people say about lab systems, everybody hates them. It's just a matter of degree and frequency, right? So we could go down the buy path, or of course there's, oh, nice wrap. There's the somewhere in the middle. Like let's build some stuff, let's buy some stuff, and that, as you can imagine, is the path that we went down. So the concept here is buy what you can, build what you must, right? If there's stuff out there, there's tools on the market that you can buy, let's buy them, let's use them. Let's build the things that are our secret sauce, right? So for Epic Sciences, the analysis of those cells, that's our secret sauce. The patient report, that's our competitive advantage. The technologies that we've developed, that's the thing that makes our company special. The rest of the stuff is really important, but I didn't want to build it. So we use SalesForce as our system of record for all patient data, which when I came into this conversation was not the path I thought I was going to go down, frankly. But with the SalesForce Shield product, we're able to sign a BAA with SalesForce, and we get a lot of encryption at rest, encryption in transit. A lot of those HIPAA requirements that you have to have are present within that platform. FedEx just ships stuff. We'll skip those guys. They have, by the way, worst API ever. If your developers are complaining about integrating with the FedEx API, They've got a reason to. We can talk about that offline if you want. The other thing was, how do we handle everything in the lab? In those tiled areas where we've got people wearing lab coats and gloves, what's the system that they can use? And we chose Platform for Science for that. We've looked at a number of different choices over the time I've been at Epic, and specifically for this project. And we chose Platform for Science for a number of reasons, and we'll dig into that here shortly. The other question is, where does the data go? And this is one of the hardest problems that we faced with all of this, because if you've got a number of different systems, that means your data is stored in a bunch of different places, and maintaining referential integrity between SalesForce and the Platform for Science is tricky, right? So we had to take steps to make sure that samples linked up with orders, and orders linked up with patients, and everything all connected up to each other as it moved through the system. Of course, we have our own data, right? We have the slide images that we acquire. We have the data about the individual cells that we found through the process. We have data about the different, the metadata about the images and so forth. Within Platform for Science, we're storing information about the order, about the sample, the containers the samples in, the batches that we're processing these in, our controls, all of that stuff is being handled within Platform for Science. So how does it all fit together? First of all, may surprise no one, we consider ourselves the center of the universe. So we'll start there. We first built out what we call the Epic Sciences Hub. And this is a web services hub that we use to integrate everything that we're connecting to. We could have gone with a MuleSoft or one of the other kind of big API integration engines that are out on the market. For our company size and our place in the world, we actually felt that this was one of the things for us to build. And then from that hub, we connected a bunch of other stuff. So we trade a lot of data with genomic health. So we have APIs specifically around trading data back and forth with GHI. We, of course, have a bunch of data in SalesForce. As we're receiving those orders into CoreLIMS, we need to get that order data into SalesForce, because that's our system of record for all of our patient data, and an order is a key part of all of that. We also have medical devices that are in the lab, and those devices make data, and it's kind of stupid to have your lab technician print out something from a white blood cell counter and then type in the values into a system. We've been seeing people do this for 30 years, and it's just as stupid today as it was all those years ago, right? So we need to interface those devices in. We do that in through the Epic Hub as well. That data goes directly into the Platform for Science, and we use that in calculations for figuring out how many slides to create and some other interesting things. We also have our own software, which is the thing off to the right there. That's our slide QC page, where we're showing our technologist histograms and data around the slides that we just analyzed, so that they can make sure that the slide is good before passing it on to the pathologist. That one page has data from SalesForce. It has data from CoreLIMS. We don't actually have the FedEx data on there, although it's come up. And so we're coalescing all of that information into a single system for our lab techs and our pathologists to use. This is the first lab I've ever worked at where we didn't have our pathologists using 3 or 4 different systems to sign out patient reports. And I can tell you that I've been hated on by a lot of people in a lot of labs for a lot of years. It's the first time I haven't been hated on by our pathologists. It's kind of nice. We do all the other vendors that we integrate with, the people that manufacture and assemble our kits that we also interface with. Haven't called this out, but all of our technology runs within Amazon Web Services. I mentioned that we're a small company. At the time we built this, we had an IT staff of 0. Now we have an IT staff of 3. I don't want to maintain all of the security credentials. I don't want to maintain all of the protections just on my own. I need some help with that, right? I need SalesForce Shield. I need AWS and their HIPAA compliant services so that I don't have to build all of that myself. So let's talk about all cloud deployments. Putting patient information in the cloud is a scary thing. If you've come up and you've been around the business for a while, your first instinct is to put it in a data center with armed guards and somebody checking every bit as it comes in and out of the data center, right? That's just not practical. And the cloud deployments there's some really good advantages. Having all of our patient data in Salesforce has freed up so much time for my team to work on other less commoditized problems, right? Using the platform for science as a cloud deployment has allowed my team to work on, again, other things that are more challenging, and we don't have to manage that. However, there's some things you have to take care of, and security is the first one. Take every opportunity you can to make sure you're integrating your authentication schemes with whatever it is that you do within your company, right? People love cloud tools. We love our smart sheets, and we love our, pick a cloud service. Everybody loves these things. The problem is, in the corporate setting, is when somebody leaves the company, you have to go to Slack, and you have to go to Smartsheet, and you have to go to CoreLIMS, and you have to go to Salesforce, and you have to go to all these different places and deactivate those people's accounts. Otherwise, you're wide open. Of course, the other fun is when people start at the company, you have to go through all the systems and get somebody enabled. You end up with an onboarding checklist that's 10 feet long, and that's just stupid, right? If you get your security integrated from the beginning, you provision an account up front, and then more importantly, when it's time for that employee to leave for whatever reason, it's a one-click disable and they're done, and you don't have to worry about them gaining access to your system. Because it's a cloud-based system, you also need to understand that people can access it from anywhere, right? Unless you make restrictions. So if your LIMS is cloud deployed, which I highly recommend, you want to take the next step, though. There's really not a good reason for people outside of the company, outside of the 4 walls of the lab, to really be accessing that LIMS software. Lock it down, right? As much as you can get away with. Now, locking down Salesforce, it creates a whole other set of challenges because your sales team generally likes to not be in the office all the time. So there's some things that you need to take care of on that front. Backups are another really important thing. So we'll use my pals at Salesforce as an example of what not to do. So Salesforce, they do back up your data, yay. If you need to restore your data, it's a one-time per incident charge of $10,000 and a 4 to 6 week turnaround time. Yeah. Fortunately, we didn't discover this the hard way, but imagine telling your lab director that, yeah, we kind of messed up, and in 6 weeks, we'll probably have our data back. You and I would both be in the unemployment line together at that point, right? So make sure you've got backups. By the way, CoreLIMS and Platform for Science is backed up much more rationally. It's backed up daily. They keep them for 30 days, I believe. And restoring them is pretty darn painless. So with Salesforce, for example, you need to actually get third-party solutions to do your backups for you because they don't offer it in a rational way, right? And then test your restore process. And I threw this seriously in there because I'm going to be serious about this. If you can't restore your backup, you don't have a backup, right? How many of you guys have SOPs that call for at least an annual check to make sure you can restore your data? If you don't, you should, right? Make sure that works because Having been down the path of having a corrupted backup before, I can tell you it's an unpleasant conversation at best. And also realize that there's going to be some technology present in the building. Most lab devices aren't connected. Surprise. Even if they've got an Ethernet port, sometimes they're disabled. Depends on what level of clearance that particular device has. But your lab devices are not generally connected, so you'll have to have some technology footprint to get that data to the cloud. Label printers are fun too, because if your LIMS is not in the building and your label printers are, how do you connect it, right? So in our environment, for example, we have a VPN set up between our CoreLIMS instance within AWS and our internal network, and we're able to do barcode printing that way. And when you have a device that requires a lot of data, a next-gen sequencer, slide imager, things like that, generally, you don't stream that data directly to the cloud. It lands somewhere local before getting sent to that magic data store in the sky. So make sure you've provisioned for that, for the backups of all that, the security of all that, and so forth. So remember I said earlier that we are the center of the universe? Many lab systems consider themselves the center of the universe. And they have a hard time thinking that you're going to connect them and their software to somebody else. We started with the premise that our LIMS was only going to be a piece of the puzzle, not the entire game. So we first and foremost required that our system had an API that would allow us to interface into it from external systems. It allows us to use that web services hub to talk to the LIMS, get data out of it, push data into it, and make it a piece in that larger puzzle of how we are solving all of our problems. Another key element for us with this software is that we could start small and build. Some of the software out there that we looked at, and we actually had an implementation that got about 6 months in before we canned it, required us to do a massive launch up front, and we did not have the ability to be more agile in how we develop the system and to push that software out a bit at a time. We actually, our first release of this and release of CoreLIMS was in July of last year. We've had, I think, 6 or 8 releases since then. And each time we've incrementally added to what CoreLIMS does, what SalesForce does, what our own software does, a little bit at a time. We're a small company. We can't afford 3-year-long projects and pissed off users at the end. And we need a system that our staff could maintain over time. We've used a fair amount of professional services to get over the finish line with this, but that was to get started. The idea is we need a system that we could maintain ourselves and keep going for the long haul. In any partnership, in any friendship, you need to be able to have a frank conversation around where things could get better, and I've included a few areas for our pals at CoreLIMS and Thermo where we could do even better. So the first thing is OData. More. I had to, now, my developers had to tell me what OData was before I could figure out that we needed to get better at it. But Core has put a lot of time and effort into expanding their OData API in the last year, and we're looking forward to see more there. There's actually a session tomorrow afternoon on OData that I'm looking forward to see where that's going. With the version that we implemented last year, CoreLIMS could not make an authenticated API call that used anything other than simple authentication, passing usernames and passwords at each call. That wasn't acceptable for us. So we actually had to build a shim service that sat between CoreLIMS and the Epic Hub. We're looking forward to solving that. And at the time also, the service account, or the accounts used for making API calls were considered a full-blown user account. We'd like to see Core allow service accounts to be provisioned separately from end-user accounts from a licensing standpoint. Reporting is an area that it's always hard, right? People like their reports, they like them to be pretty, and we think that there's some things that that Core could do with reports, specifically around scheduling and emailing, that we think could be super powerful. I'd love to be able to lay out my pages in grids. The straight name value pair style, the field name on the left, value on the right, gets old in a hurry. We'd like to be able to lay that out in more flexible ways. And there's some fields that are just on every single page, and I'd like to get rid of them. So please, can we get rid of some of those fields and make them not visible because we're not using them? And this is crazy. My team actually reads documentation a lot. And there are times that the technical documentation lags behind the releases. That said, they do generally get there eventually, but we really would love to see that documentation really flow nicely with the rest of the tool. And lastly, like I said, we're a small company. I have 3 developers, I have 4 software testers, I have 2 business analysts. We're a very small team and a very small company, so we needed a lot of help to get this work done. Our first call out is to the team at Asterix. Rob and Trey were really the guys that kind of kept us all honest. Joel Swenson and Bill Halliday did a ton of work for us. Those guys are rock stars. And I think Bill's doing a session tomorrow on using the API. Highly recommend it. If you can get either one of those 2 on your project, I will hate you forever because you took them away from me. And secondly, the team at CoreLIMS and Thermo. Patrick is somewhere in the house. Lisa is remote. She's our project manager. She's amazing. Patrick has endured a number of unpleasant conversations like a true champion, and I really appreciate the things he's done for us. Nicole and Benita were big parts of making us successful all the way along the path. Huge thank you to those folks. Again, we're a small company. We needed a lot of help. And that's all I've got. So thank you very much. If you're interested in learning more about the ARV7 tests or more about Epic Sciences, the QR code will get you to our ARV7 site, or epicsciences.com will take you to our full site. Thank you very much.